Good morning, Christ Hold Fast. My name is Bruce Hillman. I'm pastor at Hillside Lutheran Brethren Church in northern New Jersey and a contributor to Christ Hold Fast. And it's Thursday, which means that we are going through the book of Ecclesiastes. And today we're finishing up chapter 2. Now, I need to apologize a little bit because I'm going to be slightly longer today than I normally am, because today's the big picture, what the book is really all about. And so I'm going to try to do this as quickly as I can, but this is some really good stuff, especially for those of you who are anxious and who are control freaks. There's some really good news today. Well, let's pick it up. Ecclesiastes 2, 18 through 26. Here's what it says. I hated all my toil, in which I toil under the sun, seeing that I must leave it to the man who will come after me, and who knows whether he will be wise or a fool. Yet he will be master of all for which I toiled, and used my wisdom under the sun. And this also is vanity. So I turned about, and gave my heart up to despair over all the toil of my labors under the sun. Because sometimes a person who has toiled with wisdom and knowledge and skill must leave everything to be enjoyed by someone who did not toil for it. This also is vanity and a great evil. What has a man from all the toil and striving of heart with which he toils beneath the sun? For all his days are full of sorrow, and his work is a vexation. Even in the night his heart does not rest, and this also is vanity. There is nothing better for a person than that he should eat and drink and find enjoyment in his toil. This also, I saw, is from the hand of God. For apart from him, who can eat or who can have enjoyment? For to the one who pleases him, God has given wisdom and knowledge and joy. But to the sinner, he has given the business of gathering and collecting, only to give to one who pleases God. This also is vanity, a striving after the wind. End of reading. Well, today, things get exciting because today we're putting all the pieces together and we're going to talk about joy. Now, what has been driving the book so far is this idea of everything being temporary. Death is the final equalizer of all things, and we are driven by two things. Loss, fear of loss, so we hunker down and we try to preserve and protect the things that we have, and the attempts to control our future by profit and by gain. And so the writer keeps asking, what's the point of life? What does a man gain? What advantage does one have if in the end death comes for everybody and nothing is really new? And today he makes one last observation, one that maybe one of your parents told you when you complained about something, because basically what he says today is, life's not fair. Life's not fair. And the example he uses is, you have all this money, and then you die, you didn't get to spend it, and it goes to someone else. And you had to work your whole life to toil and labor and scheme and do all these things to get that money, but you didn't get to fully enjoy all of it because it went to somebody else. And we all know of people who are, trust fund babies, or people who've inherited things or gotten ahead because they didn't earn it. And it's unfair. There's other people who are working really hard and trying to make their way, and they're not as successful. And he calls this a great evil, that sometimes people get what appear to be blessings and success and wealth, and they didn't earn it, they didn't toil for it. And then there's people who toiled for it and earned it and don't get to enjoy it. They get sick or something happens, and so on and so forth. And what happens is, because this is reality, because we know this, that life is unfair, it creates a tremendous amount of anxiety. We're afraid of loss, and we're trying to gain. This takes on a psychological element for us, and I like this. He says I like the reality of this. He says in verse 23, the second part, even in the night, his heart does not rest. Even when our physical labor is done, we get racing thoughts at night. And we think about the next day, and we begin to get anxious, and we begin to think about how we're going to juggle everything and how we're going to control everything. Well, there's some good news then today that he has for us, and it's really the point of the book. He wants to talk about a certain kind of way to worship. And let me read you this idea that gets introduced in our passage this morning, and it's verse 24. And he says this, there is nothing better for a person than that he should eat and drink and find enjoyment in his toil. This also I saw is from the hand of God. It's nothing better than that a person should enjoy what, we would say it this way, there's nothing better than a person should enjoy what God has given as daily bread. And that this is a way that we worship, by realizing the daily bread that we have today. So let me try to unpack this with a couple examples. The first one comes from St. Augustine. He made a distinction, not talking about Ecclesiastes, but it applies here, I think, very well, between temporal things, things that are not eternal, and eternal things. And Augustine said that one of the problems is that we take all the things in our lives and we give them eternal significance. This is fundamentally what, for Augustine, it means to have our desire be turned bad because of sin. What our desires do is they become possessive. And they try to take temporal things and they try to put eternal weight on them, Augustine says. And he says, when you put eternal weight on temporal things, they collapse underneath the weight of it. So what does he mean by this? Here's an example from my life a couple years ago where this really came home for me. I was on my way to do a Bible study at another church. Someone had canceled, and it was kind of an emergency, and they called me and they said, our pastor's away, can you come and do this thing? And I said, sure. And on my way down on the highway, I still don't know how this happened. There was no car or truck in front of me. But a giant rock came up, hit my windshield, and all of a sudden, bam, and I had a crack all the way across the windshield. And the first thing that happened was I said, not pastor words, which I'm not particularly proud of, but that's what happened. And then I started praying. And it wasn't a good type of prayer. It was a, really, God? Really? I'm busy enough. I got a lot going on. These people asked me to help. I'm going down to help them, and you throw a rock at my windshield. This really self-righteous kind of prayer. And maybe you've had one or two of those before. And then it hit me. Augustine's words hit me. I had put eternal significance on the windshield. In other words, I was upset because that windshield, now listen to the language here, should not have broken. That rock should not have come and hit my windshield. In other words, I was living in the sense that it was wrong or unfair or terrible that my windshield wasn't eternal, that it actually could break, and that it actually did. After all, it is just a sheet of glass moving on a 60, 70 mile an hour vehicle. Augustine says you do this with everything. You do it with your relationships. And so when someone passes away, it's not just that you miss them. You can't help turn that person into some type of idol. And now they've gone. And your love for that person cannot bear it, that they're gone. It searches because they're eternal. Love treats everything as if it's eternal. The things you love are things that bring you all this significance. And Augustine says it collapses under the weight of it. Well, that's kind of what the writer of Ecclesiastes is saying that we are doing. We live our lives fearful of what we will lose. So again, we see our things as having this kind of eternal quality to them. And we say it's unfair when those things are taken from us. But think about Job. When Job worships in the first and second chapter of the book of Job and his family is taken away, what does he say? You know the famous phrase, the Lord has given, the Lord has taken away, blessed be the name of the Lord. But that's not how a lot of us live. We're not as good as Job, are we? And we don't want to lose the things that we have, and so we're afraid of that. And so one of the ways we mitigate against that fear is to try to control the future so we don't lose, and also to gain enough stuff so that if we do lose, we kind of have a nest egg of some type. And the writer of Ecclesiastes has just given us all this experience in the first two chapters. And he goes, it doesn't work. And you know what? It actually leads to a lot of anxiety. Because even in the night, we have all these restless thoughts. Now, remember last week, he gave us one positive thing. And he said that wisdom was better than folly. But he said, even though wisdom is better than folly, there's a problem. Wisdom doesn't have any advantage. It doesn't help you mitigate against loss. Death is the final equalizer. But he still says wisdom's better than folly. But he didn't tell us why. Now he tells us why. Wisdom is better than folly because wisdom sees something reason and life experience don't. That everything that you and I have, we have from the hand of God. In other words, we live life by gift, by promise, and not by profit or ambition or control, things of that nature. Joy is to be found in Ecclesiastes in giving praise and thanks to God for what we have right now. Let me tell you one other story from my life on how this lesson can be applicable. I have someone who is a dear friend of mine who for many years has struggled with addiction. And this has been years of this. And you might know someone who's addicted or someone close to you, and you know what that struggle is like, not only for the person, but for those in the family context as well. Sometimes they say addiction is a family disease. And in the early stages of the addiction, I was doing everything I could to try to stop the addict from using. And I would do everything from pleading to, throwing out drugs to doing all sorts of ways to control. And it didn't work. And what happened is my anxiety started to go up and up and up because I knew where addiction leads. It eventually leads to a premature death if it continues. And I was trying to stop that. I was trying to control that. And one day I was reading Ecclesiastes and it suddenly hit me. You know what? My friend might not be here tomorrow. Your loved one who's in trouble might not be here tomorrow. But you know what? They're here right now. Now stick with me for a minute. They're here right now. I can't control where they're going to be in 2 hours. I can't control where they're going to be in 5 years. I don't know the future. But I know that right now, my friend who struggles with addiction is alive by the grace of God right now. So I can give praise to God for what is real. What is real? He's alive right now. And that begins to be a life of worship because it's a life that lives in the moment but not for the moment. And that's how I sum up the message of Ecclesiastes. Live in the moment but not for the moment. And I have to make a very careful distinction here from what our society has a similar saying that is actually very bad from a biblical point of view, which is YOLO. You only live once. And that's more of a hedonistic type of philosophy. Maximize pleasure, maximize experience, because you're going to die, and then it's all over, so try to maximize. This is not what Koheleth, the writer of Ecclesiastes, is telling us to do. He's taking quite a different tact. Live in the moment, but not for it. In other words, we're not hedonists. We recognize that there's going to be a tomorrow, but we recognize tomorrow is not promised to us. And so the message of Ecclesiastes is really teaching us how to live in the reality of daily bread that we pray in the Lord's Prayer. It's going back to what Jesus says about anxiety and about worry. And he says, don't worry about tomorrow. Look at the birds. Look at the lilies. See how God provides for them. God will provide for you. It's the message of manna in the Old Testament. Manna in the Old Testament comes up every morning. God provides the food. You have it today. But as soon as you try to store it, as soon as you try to hoard it, as soon as you try to collect extra, what does the Bible say happens to it? It rots. As soon as you move from living in the moment to trying to gain, from trying to profit, that's when you lose. That's when things start to rot. So I'm going to maybe do something that's weird, but hey, I'm a weird guy. I want to show how this type of worship can take place. So I want you to listen to something here, if you can just listen for a second. I hope the microphone will pick it up. Do you hear this noise? Do you hear that? Now, I know Eric Sorensen would not like this noise. This is the noise of the lid of my teapot on my kettle. And actually, this is an incredibly pleasant sound for me. And maybe that isn't the sound that's pleasant for you, but there's a lot of things that we can find joy in every day. When I'm stressed and I pour a cup of tea and I hear that little clink, it's just a little moment of happiness for me. Maybe for you it's the sound of your child playing and laughing in the other room, or mom's home cooking that wafts through the house, or sunlight that streams in through a window and hits the floor, or rain that touches the patters on the top of the roof. Whatever it is, everything that we are experiencing today, the writer of Ecclesiastes says that all these good and perfect things, they come from God. He says, for nothing is better for a person than that he should eat and drink and find enjoyment in his toil. This also I saw is from the hand of God, for apart from him, who can eat and who can have enjoyment. So, one last point, and I know we're a little over today, but just one more point. He makes a point about work here, about labor. And in the garden, in Genesis, when we were called to work and tend the garden, that was not a punishment. That was what we were made to do. Our act of worship was tending the garden, caring for the earth. But when we sinned, labor became toilsome, because labor became about profit, about not being naked, about getting rid of brambles and working the earth and toiling for it. The writer of Ecclesiastes says, what you and I need to learn to do is see God's hand in all the little things that he's given us today, and to not be so concerned with what may or may not happen tomorrow that it robs us, see, from the contentment that we can have today in all the little things that God is doing for us. Maybe you're worried about your health, but you have your health today. Whatever level it's at, you have it today. Maybe you're worried about a family member, but your family member's okay today. Maybe you're worried about a test you have to take, and you're afraid that, if you take that test, you're going to fail, and your career, all the other extrapolations that come from that. But God is with you today, and you're okay today. And most likely you're going to be okay tomorrow. And as we start to live in the moment, but not for the moment, and we begin to see everything is coming from the hand of God, we begin to learn what the prayer, "Give us this day our daily bread," is really about. It is about recognizing God's hand in the midst of all things, and living with a type of mindfulness that gives thanks to God for everything that we have. What this means then is that as I recognize what God is doing today, and I start to feel the weight of tomorrow come upon me, there's only one thing that I can do to stop tomorrow from invading and taking my joy today, and that is to recall God's promises. Because only God's promises are the things that can ensure any type of future. Not my power, not my ambition, not my skill, not my intelligence. Only God's promises. And how do I trust in God's promises? I trust in God's promises because today God has given me a cup of tea. It's really that simple. Because God has given me health today, God has given me friends today, God has given me life today, God has given me hope today, God has given me forgiveness of sins today, God has helped me avoid certain temptations today, he's forgiven me for the sins I've made today. And as I realize that, you know what I know about tomorrow? I know nothing about tomorrow except that God will be with me and it will be okay. And I have his promises for tomorrow today. So, that is the first glimpse into what the wisdom literature in Ecclesiastes will teach us in the remaining chapters about how to live a worshipful life of joy. Living in the moment, but not for it. Thank you for being patient with me today. I promise next week I will be much shorter. And blessings to you today as you worship in the midst of the moment. Take care.